welcome to the deep dive. Today, our mission. Well, it's genuinely counterintuitive. It really pushes back against a lot of standard self-help advice. We're looking at source material that argues anxiety, frustration, even negative thoughts. They aren't just obstacles. They might actually be the most powerful fuel for success.
That's exactly it. We're diving into a framework that's really built around personal transformation through what the author calls mental restructuring.
Okay.
And this material, it really challenges that core idea in society that, super successful people are just naturally calm or always positive.
Right, like they just woke up that way.
Yeah, instead, the claim here is that they've simply gotten really good at using, not avoiding, their darkest feelings, using them as, well, necessary motivation.
And this whole idea, it didn't just come out of thin air, did it? It wasn't like an academic theory. It sounds like it was forged in some pretty intense personal difficulty.
Oh, absolutely. Before we even get to the tools, we kind of need to understand that origin story. These insights, they really came out of a period of profound struggle for the author. We're talking severe anxiety, deep frustration, addiction issues, and then eventually even legal trouble.
Wow.
And this whole spiral, it kind of culminated in a defining rock bottom moment.
And that rock bottom, that was triggered by an arrest,
Yeah.
right? Which basically forced a hard stop on everything.
Precisely. That experience, the arrest, everything that came after that was the crucible, you could say. But instead of just collapsing under all that negativity, the realization was that the sheer intensity of that despair, that fear, it was actually a source of energy, untapped energy, really.
Okay, so wasting potential energy.
Exactly. That raw, dark energy became the foundation for figuring out a structured, repeatable way to use negativity. Not as a sign to quit, but as like a mandatory power source for change.
That completely flips the script, doesn't it? Makes the crisis the starting point, not the end. But okay, before we get into the practical steps, the sources keep mentioning this term, mental restructuring. For our listeners who are pretty well informed, what does that actually mean on a cognitive level? It's more than just thinking differently, right?
Right. It's deeper than just positive thinking. When we talk about mental restructuring here, we're really talking about changing the brain's wiring, changing those neural pathways that usually link negative feelings like intense fear or frustration with just wanting to avoid things or freezing up.
So like retraining the default reaction.
Exactly. It's a deliberate cognitive override. You're essentially rebuilding your internal management system so that when your brain flags intense negative energy, the automatic response becomes, well, production, redirection, not just trying to feel better or push it down. It's about engineering that immediate behavioral trigger.
Got it. So it's less about feeling better, necessarily, and more about operating better, using the energy that's already there, which brings us right to that core idea, negativity as fuel. How exactly do successful people use this negativity as motivation?
Well, they treat feelings like anxiety or fear or even just deep dissatisfaction, not as some kind of character flaw to be eliminated, but as a stored resource. Think of it almost like a really powerful, maybe even volatile battery.
Okay, interesting analogy.
You wouldn't just throw away a battery because it's potentially dangerous, right? You'd figure out how to harness its power safely. So they consciously expend this negative emotional energy towards a constructive goal. They recognize that strong emotions, good or bad, inherently generate powerful momentum.
I can really see the contrast with traditional self-help there. Most advice is sort of ignore the panic, focus on positive affirmations, repeat mantras.
Right.
This system seems to say, no, look right at the panic, acknowledge how powerful it feels, and then steer it.
It absolutely does. This method argues that constantly chasing positivity can often be just, well, a distraction, a way to avoid dealing with the actual difficulty. By leveraging those dark feelings, you actually acknowledge the frustration or the panic, you feel it, and then you redirect that huge emotional energy into focused, productive action. You're not trying to soothe the fear away. You're leveraging the feeling of the fear itself to make the alternative, doing the hard work, feel less painful than the consequences of doing nothing.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
To actually do that steering, though, the sources lay out 3 specific tools. Let's start with the one that honestly sounds the most daunting. Tool 1. Negative visualization.
Yes, and this is probably where this system gets misunderstood the most often. Negative visualization. It involves deliberately, actively creating a truly terrifying alternative future.
Okay.
This isn't just, idly worrying. It's a focused, detailed construction of what happens if you fail to act. If you go back to the old habit, the addiction, or if you just quit the difficult thing you're trying to do.
But hang on, doesn't that run a really high risk of backfiring? Couldn't that just lead to feeling overwhelmed, paralyzed by dread, maybe even spiraling into anxiety or depression instead of motivation? How do you stop it from becoming counterproductive?
That's a really crucial distinction. General anxiety is usually quite passive, right? It just sort of washes over you.
Yeah.
Negative visualization, in this context, is active and it's goal-oriented. The key is the visualization has to be specific. It must be directly linked to the failure to execute your plan.
Okay, so not just general doom and gloom.
No, it needs to be vivid. You need to imagine the sights, the sounds, the feeling of isolation that comes with that specific failure, so much so that it generates immediate, almost visceral fear right now in the present. The whole purpose is deliberately generating that dread so it serves a function. It forces change now. Ah, I see. So the goal is to make the difficulty of doing the necessary work seem almost trivial compared to this catastrophic outcome you've just vividly imagined. You basically raise the stakes internally until taking action feels like the only rational, maybe even the only comfortable choice left.
Exactly right. It connects those high emotional stakes to the small, immediate decisions you need to make. So once you've used that tool one, to set up that terrifying baseline of what happens if you just drift, well, then you need the skills to actually handle the day-to-day grind, right?
Yeah.
Because things will go wrong. Which moves us perfectly into tool two, building frustration tolerance.
Okay, so if tool one is like the big power generator creating the pressure, tool two sounds like the infrastructure you need to make sure the whole system doesn't just collapse under daily stress.
That's a great way to put it. Frustration tolerance is absolutely critical here because, let's face it, the world isn't just going to magically cooperate just because you visualize success.
Yeah. If you let minor setbacks, just, a project gets delayed, someone gives you harsh feedback, a small failure, if you let that derail you completely, you'll never actually get to leverage those bigger, more powerful negative feelings effectively. You need a systematic way to process frustration without losing momentum.
Okay, so let's break down the mechanics. The sources talk about three specific steps for building this tolerance. The first one is acceptance. What does that involve?
Acceptance here means just recognizing that the negative feeling itself is present. Right now, without judging it, without immediately trying to fix it or push it away, it's simply noticing, okay, frustration is here, or anxiety is here. Most people just try to skip this, don't they? They instantly fight the feeling, which ironically just gives it more power. This step is just about grounding yourself in the reality of the moment, even if it's messy.
Okay, just acknowledging its presence, and then once we've accepted it's there, the second step is labeling. How's that different from just acknowledging?
Labeling requires a bit more analytical precision. You need to identify and name the specific granular feeling as clearly as you can. Ask yourself, is this generalized anger? Or is it actually shame about that specific mistake I made? Is it anxiety about what other people might think? By giving it a clear, precise label, you kind of strip away its abstract, overwhelming quality. It stops being this big, vague cloud hanging over you.
And become something more concrete.
Exactly. It becomes a discrete thing that you could actually observe and start to manage.
Yeah, makes sense. Moving from this abstract feeling to an observable object seems key for getting some control. And then the final step is using realistic mental cues to manage that labeled feeling. This sounds really practical. Can you give us some specifics?
Yeah, this is probably the most practical step for listeners to grab onto. Instead of relying on those generic positive affirmations like, I am strong, I am capable,
Which your brain often rejects when you're feeling frustrated?
totally rejects, because it feels untrue in that moment. So instead, you use mental cues that are actually grounded in reality and in the structure you've already built, maybe using tool one.
Okay, can you give an example? Like a good realistic cue versus a less helpful one?
Sure. Let's say you hit a major technical problem on a really complex project. The typical response might be panic, followed by that unhelpful internal thought, oh no, this is impossible, I should just give up.
Yeah, familiar.
A productive, realistic mental cue, one that's built on past experience or planning, might sound more like, okay, this type of project always hits a snag around this point. My original timeline actually accounted for a potential 48-hour delay right here. I'm still technically on schedule. Focus on the next two debugging steps.
Ah, I see. So it turns the emotional flare-up into just another data point within your larger rational plan. The cue connects that momentary pain back to the structure you already have in place. Keeps the energy moving forward productively.
Exactly right. Acceptance, labeling, and then realistic mental cues. It's this systematic approach that ensures the energy generated by that negative visualization isn't just frittered away on unnecessary emotional drama.
That structured way of managing things leads us perfectly into tool 3, which feels like the essential critical thinking component, proving the brain wrong. This seems like the ultimate step for making sure all that emotional energy is pointed in the right direction.
It really is the ultimate utility manager, you could say. Because strong emotions, especially intense fear or anger, they generate really strong, really convincing thoughts.
Yeah, they feel very true in the moment.
Absolutely. So proving the brain wrong is that critical skill where you deliberately introduce doubt into those powerful internal stories. You let logic step in and potentially override the purely emotional momentum.
So what specifically are we questioning when that emotion is running high? Is it just about trying to argue ourselves into feeling calm?
Not really calming down, no. It's more about analysis. You're questioning two distinct things about the thought or the emotion that follows a setback. Let's say you lose a big client or really mess up a presentation. First, you question its truth. When your brain starts screaming, "You're a total failure and your career is basically over," you step back and logically challenge the factual basis. Is that actually true? Or is this an exaggeration massively fueled by the disappointment or fear I'm feeling right now?
Okay, challenging the factual accuracy. And what's the second question?
The second question, and maybe the more powerful one within this particular system, is questioning its productivity. Even if there's some truth to the feeling maybe you did mess up significantly, does dwelling on the thought, "I am a failure," actually help you win the next contract?
Hmm.
Does that kind of rumination lead to any kind of constructive action? So the filter becomes, if the thought isn't actively moving you forward, it doesn't matter if it feels 100% true or totally false in the moment. It has no utility in this system.
That shifts the focus completely, doesn't it?
Yeah.
From just managing how you feel to managing the usefulness of your thoughts. It's like a filter.
Huh.
If this thought doesn't serve the goal you've restructured yourself around, it needs to be dismissed and actively replaced with a productive cue or action. That really ties the mental restructuring directly to practical applied success.
It really completes the loop. You've got negative visualization setting the high stakes and generating the initial energy. You have frustration tolerance managing the inevitable small failures along the way. And then proving the brain wrong acts as the navigation system, constantly ensuring that emotional steam is directed towards the engine, not just blowing off uselessly.
It's fascinating how these 3 tools, the visualization, the tolerance, the questioning, they really create this kind of closed-loop system for managing emotional energy. It ensures that the leverage you gain from fear or frustration isn't just lost.
Yeah, the synthesis is pretty clear when you see them together. This is fundamentally an emotional energy management system, not just a philosophy or a way of thinking. Success, at least according to this material, is achieved by actively leveraging, not trying to avoid that inner struggle. You don't sit around waiting for motivation to strike. You actually generate it, often through managed fear, and then you harness it using these rigorous structures. The core argument is that your darkest moments, your biggest struggles, they actually contain your most powerful, maybe even necessary fuel for change.
That really is a potent thought to end on. The idea that intense struggle isn't just something you need to recover from, but it might be the very energy source you need to tap into. So, thinking about that, if those rock bottom moments can be leveraged like jet fuel, what about the smaller stuff? What small frustrations or anxieties are you maybe dismissing or trying to suppress in your daily life right now? Are you maybe wasting energy trying to wish them away when instead they could be reframed? Reframed as necessary, powerful motivation for whatever your next big step is. Think of that specific, detailed scenario that genuinely terrifies you if you don't act. Because according to this material, that fear, it might be exactly what you need to finally force real, lasting change.